So we got contacted by Jeff, and he gave us a question of, if you have a veteran in a regular drug treatment court, what do you need to know, or how do you identify them? And so there were 4 points to it, and it really made me think that there was a question that came up through the coordinators meetings and things like that, that individuals are struggling, or the regular treatment courts are struggling with having a veteran or not knowing what to do for a veteran. And so some of the things that we wanted to kind of talk about, I don't believe in PowerPoint because I was in the Army and I got PowerPointed to death. So that's why I just didn't want to do PowerPoint. But I did want to provide some information, and so we will give her a packet of information. And so it's really just kind of a conversation that I wanted to start having with you all, because if you have specific, if you're having specific situations that you want to talk about, like how to address the veteran or what to do, we're here to answer those questions. As he just went over with our introduction, I have been in the military. I actually was a public defender before I became involved in the military, and I interacted with a lot of veterans that were clients of mine while I was a public defender. And I always just felt like I never knew the resources that were out there to help those individuals once they got involved in the criminal justice system, of like what I could do for them. I actually ended up meeting with Tester at a couple of different functions and talked to him about it. Started making connections with the VA for those individual clients when I was working as a public defender. And I always felt like, having a treatment court would be helpful, but as a lowly public defender, I didn't have any power to really interact in that. And then I got more involved in the military when I became a JAG officer, and I saw my soldiers that were getting involved in the criminal justice system as a JAG officer. I was more on the legal assistance side, so trying to help them through some of their problems that they were experiencing that we could handle in the military, because it's different than what you can handle on the civilian side. And it really just started that conversation of what can we do for these individuals. National Guard soldiers in particular, which is what you're probably going to see a lot of, they get deployed at a higher rate than regular military. And that is surprising to a lot of people, but National Guard is used as a stopgap or a fill for regular military. And a lot of times when the political individuals get out on the news and say, hey, we are reducing our numbers of regular military, they are not reducing the reserves or the National Guard. And so those are the soldiers that are actually getting put into the zones to handle whatever's happening over there, while the regular military is getting pulled back home. So when you start thinking about a soldier who has gone through boot camp, has gone through all of the training, has become a soldier, but is only a part-time soldier, because that's really how the National Guard and the reserves are sold, is serve your country, serve your state, but also have a civilian career. They're getting pulled out of that civilian career and that civilian life over and over and over again for the military. And they have to transition back and forth so much more than a regular military individual who has been, they go into boot camp, they serve their time, whether it's the 4-year term, their initial enlistment term, or if they stay longer and they retire and things like that. They live that life that entire time. National Guard and reservists do not live that life the entire time. It is very hard on families. It is very hard for them to really have that switch back and forth, because there is a massive shift in identity when you start talking about going into the military. Jesse, who is my treatment provider here in Bozeman, he talks a lot about this, because he was a Marine, and then he's been in a law enforcement agency, and now he's a treatment provider, so he's shifted his identity so many times through his lifetime with the different shifts in his career. It's been building on itself, and I think you're really happy with where you're at now, but you have had that identity shift, and we all go through that as we change roles. So when you change from an adult, like a high school student to a college student, that's a shift in identity. When you go through those processes, you can kind of think, all of your clients are starting to feel that way when they go from a criminal who's been involved in the court system to a treatment court participant, that's a shift. These are things that you kind of need to think about as you're interacting with these participants, that shift for the identity of the military to a civilian is such a huge, massive shift that not everybody does it very well, which is why we get them in the criminal justice system. There's some information in your packet. There are 2 doctors that work with the VA, Dr. Brian Meyer and Kristen Becerra. They have been doing a ton of research on that shift in identity and how to start communicating, kind of helping the participant, helping the individual who's leaving the military, who's left the military, kind of reintegrate into civilian society, and how to switch some of that communication and things like that. So there's some great information from them. They did an amazing presentation at RISE. Dr. Meyer, when I asked to use some of his presentation, he was like, I've been trying to present in Montana for years. So plug that I want to come to Montana. I was like, no problem. I'm going to ask kind of what your experiences are in terms of dealing with veterans in your treatment court. So I know we have individuals from 2 vets treatment courts, so we only have vets. We don't have non-vets in our court. But anybody else in courts that are regular treatment courts that have vets?
We have 1.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's with the Star Court.
Okay.
We've had 2 total since I've been in there.
And where's the Star Court?
In Billings.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Judge Nurse.
Okay.
And then I treat vets as well, because I'm a chaplain with the police department, so all the PD, every time we have a suicide subject, I get called and then I work with them.
So what do you think, because you experience both, what are you seeing with the shift? Or what do you see kind of between the 2?
Shift in what way?
The identities, like how, do you interact differently with the regular participant versus the veteran participant?
Yes, the mentality is different between a non-vet and a regular offender, because with the veterans you connect with them. Being a Marine vet myself, I connect off of that. Yep. And so whether that person was in the Marine Corps or in the Army or Navy or Air Force, whatever, we connect as on that level.
I will say veterans, and it's funny to say this because I am a veteran, there is a feeling that sometimes they may be better, or they may act like they're better than a regular participant. Because we see it with ours, even within our court, we have veterans that are like, oh no, I'm a veteran, so I'm a little bit better. They will never say that out loud. They will never say, I'm a veteran, I am better. But there's definitely a mentality of, I served my country, I sacrificed for this country, I earned some of the stuff that, you know, I don't want to say this because that makes us sound like we're better than anybody else. We're not as a veteran, but I think that there's definitely that mentality. And you have to be a little careful with that with your regular participants, that the veteran's going to stand back, be a little bit more isolated and go, I'm not like them. I'm different because I'm a veteran.
And society, too, has historically treated it differently.
Yes.
The meritocracy aspect of it, saying that the veteran went through this many more difficult types of experiences compared to the regular population.
Yes, exactly.
And that was going to be kind of my question, was ultimately, do you find, so I'm part of the same court, I'm the defense attorney though, so I don't often see, who's a veteran or not. It's not very clear to me all the time. However, I could see that when that is portrayed to our court, specifically though we're not a veterans court, that maybe some of those individuals are being held to a higher standard because they've been to, specific trainings, or have you ever experienced that before?
Right.
So like, you know what I'm saying?
And through my research, they typically should be held to a higher standard because they will function better with that direction. When we go back to some of the presentations we saw this morning with proximal and distal goals, they've been more with the goal achieving, the white picket fence. We learn about the military drives home that you don't want to mess your white picket fence. What's inside that is special to you, and there's core beliefs that go with that, and so that achieving that higher standard. They follow better directions, you'll notice that. And it talks about if you give them more of a checklist, they'll do better than your typical offender.
And you'll see that too. That's one of the things that with a vets court, like everybody falls into line so much faster in a vets court because I am the commanding officer. As the judge, I am the commanding officer. And the participants understand that. And they immediately are like, I am the only one that goes by a title. Everybody else goes by their first name. But they know that they have to follow what I say. That doesn't always mean that they do it right or that they do it the way that they're supposed to or anything along those lines. But they will fall into that, that rhythm and that routine so much faster than a regular participant will. But you have to be careful because they are very good at just checking all the boxes and not actually putting the work behind it. Because if they look good, I'm at attention, I am, everything's squared away, I am doing what I'm supposed to do, I am doing just fine. And nobody needs to know what's actually inside and how bad my mind is because I don't want to talk about it. That's something that you really have to break down with a veteran more so than I think a regular participant who isn't used to being squared away, who doesn't know what squared away even means. And they walk in and they're like, whatever, Judge, how you use today. Veterans won't always be the first to admit that, especially if they feel like they're not in a safe environment. And so those are kind of things that I think are going to be harder on the team to pull out. Mentorship is going to be so important to them. So finding somebody that you can connect that has that experience because they'll open up to that person a little bit better is going to be really important. I don't think just because they're following the rules and they're checking the boxes that they're doing better than somebody else because they are very good at hiding it more so. So, and you've got a lot of experience with veterans and the programs that you've worked with. So how would you help break down some of those barriers from a team that doesn't have the military experience?
So I think that the key piece is understanding where the foundation comes from. And what she's talking about is the process of boot camp. You go to boot camp and it's chaos, but then you learn how to follow the rules and not direct attention to yourself. So you start checking the boxes. You're allowing the other individuals that are screwing up to take all of the blame and you just kind of fall in line. That's exactly what they do when they come into court. But later on in boot camp is when the drill instructors really start focusing on the individual mindset, like what their decisions are. And that is where, if you had a veteran in a regular drug court, you're going to have people that are constantly getting in trouble. They're kind of the first, second phases. They're working on things. That veteran's going to come in. They're going to analyze everything. They're going to figure out how to not get in trouble. So they're going to focus on the individuals that are like phase 3 and 4 that are doing things right, and they're going to follow that person. So I would suggest maybe finding one of your phase 5 individuals to mentor that individual at first, to allow them to get on the right track, because the phase 5 people are bought in. They're making that change. They're in the maintenance stage. They are utilizing the tools that have been given to them. And that's all that veteran needs to hear is this stuff works, and they will fall in line. But if that never happens, they will keep skating until the court's over, and they'll walk out without using the tools that they were given. Does that make sense?
So some of the ways that you can tell with military is when they walk up to the judge, how are they standing? You can tell a huge difference. Even in regular court with me, I know who are veterans, or at least who have served at some point, or who have a military family, because some military families will really instill that in their kids, even though the kids haven't served. But I can tell just on the way that they're standing in front of me that there's a military person in front of me. Most younger veterans, so that's Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom, those are the most recent veterans that we have, will not actually say that they are veterans. So if you ask them, are you a veteran? They're going to go, no. Now if you ask them if they served, that they will usually answer, because they don't feel like they are a World War II veteran. Like they didn't earn that status, or a Vietnam veteran. So when you're looking at the younger participants, that question of have you served, what did you do, what branch did you serve in, things like that, that may open the door a little bit more. then are you a veteran? Because that is a shift that they just aren't ready to make, that they're not old enough for, whatever it is, they don't want to say that they're a veteran.
I have a question related to that then, because both of our participants, we're about to induct one next week. Both of ours were reservists. Neither one of them spent any time overseas, and neither one of them would go and apply for Camel Corps, even though we asked them over and over and over again, please put in for Camel Corps. It is more appropriate for you. You'll do better there. You'll be a round fellow vet, and they would not do it. What is your recommendation?
My recommendation is to keep them, because they need the services, they need your court, but they don't feel good enough to be with a veteran who was a combat veteran. And there is a difference between a National Guard and reservist too. Like, if you didn't serve, I didn't serve in combat. I deployed because I mobilized to Guantanamo Bay, but I never served in combat. So there's times where people say, thank you for your service, and I'm like, I didn't really do anything. I mean, I know I did, and I really appreciate my service time, but I'm not going to be the first one that goes, oh, I'm a veteran. It just doesn't feel right. Because there are so many other people that did go through a very traumatic experience in combat that I will never understand. And my veterans in my court know I'm not a combat veteran, but because I was a JAG officer, that's a whole other level of respect that they give me because of what I did. They're also a little scared of me because of that, but nobody likes the JAG officers. We're the attorneys. We're the ones that got people in trouble or tried to get people out of trouble. It depends on what, where you were working. So I think that's part of why. Even though you look at them and go, you served, you deserve this. This is part of what you get out of the military. Is this benefit after the fact? They won't accept it. And so in that sense, you have to work with them. They've got all the tools for their routine. Routine is going to be key. They hate change. I am constantly talking to my participants and, okay, we're about to move buildings. We've got 3 weeks until we move a building. We moved courts just recently. We got a new courtroom built. We made sure that they got to come in and experience the courtroom before they had to appear in court, if possible, so that they got used to it. If I'm not going to be on the bench and I know my dates, I will tell them, hey, you're going to have a sub-judge coming up. The more I can prepare them for the change, the better they do. And that's another thing about the military. We were told every day, this is what your job plan is. This is what you're doing today. This is, boot camp. You're going to wake up at 5 a.m. You're going to do PT. You're going to do this. You're going to go do your MOS. And then you get lunch at this time. You get dinner at this time. That's how they worked. They always knew the plan. Now, combat is part, I think some of that creates some of the trauma where they don't know what's going to happen, and there's that surprise element when you're in a combat fight or anything like that. Your training from all of that routine kicks in, but it still traumatizes them because they didn't know it was about to happen, or they didn't know that shift was going to happen. So they like to be told what the plan is, if there's going to be changes, things like that. So that's another way to kind of address some of them as you're inducting them into it. Go, okay, this person might need a little bit more hand-holding in terms of not, I'm going to walk you through the process, but hey, let me tell you what the plan is, and this is what you're going to do. So their anxiety is going to go up huge for those first couple of court sessions because they don't know what to expect every time you walk in. They will learn it very quickly, but they don't know what to expect. So if somebody can walk them through and go, okay, you're going to walk up to the judge is going to ask you a couple of questions. This is the kind of the plan. We always make participants come in and watch our court at least one time before so that they see what they're about to get into, because that helps reduce that anxiety. But you can tell when the first time that they walk up, they're like, it's just everything about them, and they get very stoic and they get very quiet, and it's like pulling teeth to try to get something out of it. And then I was like, okay, so I'm going to do something different. I'm going to ask a different question or get something else, kind of moving so that they understand it's okay. I'm not going to bite you. You just need to answer my question for a minute, and then you can go and sit down. And then they start opening up. And I will say, we have some of the funniest people. Like, their sense of humor is awesome in court. It's so inappropriate sometimes, but it's awesome. And that's great, because then you can kind of feed off of that, and everybody starts feeling comfortable. It may not work completely with non-veterans, because they may not have, they may not understand that, but if somebody understands it and can help, like, encourage that, I think it works out better. So, lady in the gray, are you with a court that has veterans that are a regular treatment court?
I'm part of the family drug court
Okay.
in Butte,
Oh, so you
but
did.
Butte just set up a veterans drug court, so I'm interested in, I guess, learning how they're gonna work and if we're gonna be maybe sister programs to each other. I'm sure we will interact. So
Well,
I think it would be helpful.
And a lot of times you will have that interaction with the family court, because there have been some problems at home with some of the veteran issues when they're coming back. There's a slide in here, or there was, there's a slide with this presentation. I don't know that I actually put it in here. But the increase from a deployment, the increase of violence in the family after a deployment, there is such a massive increase after that happens. And with you in Butte, because you have the 1889 there, that unit is about to get deployed again. They were deployed in 2020, because I was with them, and they're getting deployed again next year. And so that is going to be an area where you may see some uptick in some of your partner family member assaults. Prior to the deployment, there's a lot of stress that happens that you definitely may see an uptick, which will prevent them from going. If there's a criminal charge before a deployment, they won't be going on that deployment. And so that can create some other stress, financial and things like that, that could come into play with your court.
And that's the National Guard.
Yes. Yeah. You have the Armory. It's actually going to move to Rocker, I think, in the next year or so, but that unit is getting built up down in Herrington. You had a question?
Well, not so much a question, I guess, as an observance in our court, in the county court. Sometimes when the clients first get into the court, even though they're military or were military, they're vets, they don't come off as vets.
Mm-hmm.
They've been in that atmosphere of using drugs, alcohol, and I don't know if it's because they don't feel they've let their...
That pride is gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they have to be reminded that you have to stand up, you have to address the judge by your honor, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one thing.
And you'll definitely see that change as they go through the program. Like, all of the military have those core values that are drilled into you from the very beginning. Honor, duty, selfless service is one of the Army ones. I mean, there's Army values, there's Marine values. I mean, like, every branch has its own values, which are very similar in terms of what you're taught. And when they lose that, or when they feel that they've lost it for themselves, there's a huge shift in them. But when they start earning it back, you start noticing the difference. They start standing up taller, they start being really excited to share, they start feeling prouder of themselves, and that pride comes back.
So, I am the Veterans Treatment Coordinator, obviously, like I told you. It's not the fact that they don't, want to say I'm a veteran. It's they've lost that. And the way you get that back is accept them as that veteran. You got to get that sense of structure back and give them a sense of purpose. And once they get that, then they feel good about themselves again. And it's a process. Just like we were told in all our briefs is, this doesn't end from when they graduate. This is a lifelong struggle.
Absolutely.
And obviously for me, you were talking about you're the CO, as a judge. Well, being a gunny in the Marine Corps, they look at me as like the Sergeant Major.
Yep.
So it's a little different in my court because they get that sort of respect. But the coordinators get that respect when you establish that trust.
Exactly.
So that's a big thing with veterans. They have to trust everyone within that court, even a judge.
Yes.
And once they get that trust, then they start moving forward and you start seeing changes in their lives. But do some struggle? They do. And it's more of an embarrassment because, you know, the biggest thing is they made a mistake and they're scared that they're going to be categorized as something that they were told in the military, which we all know. And
They don't want to be a dirtbag.
right, and we tried to tell them, you know, look, we're here to help you, and we try to get you, you know, I'm not saying we coddle veterans, we don't, but we give them that sense of, hey, you know what, I can do this. And you convince them, and you get that trust, and they move forward. Mentors and peer support, I'm telling you that's a great key to have. We're fortunate in a lot of our courses that we have mentors that volunteer, and they are the trusted friends. And what they discuss with them doesn't come back to me all the time, you know, and doesn't come back to the judge unless it's something you have to report. But if you guys are there as their first line of defense, they look at you and they look up to you.
I tell my veterans that what you say is between us, unless you tell me you're about to hurt yourself or somebody else.
Right.
Then the gloves come off.
Right.
Now, I don't think that the veterans, the ones I've noticed, don't think they're better than anybody else. I think that they think I'm better than this. And it's my poor choices that got me here. And they're ashamed and embarrassed about having to be in front of the judge. Now, once they overcome that, that's when you start seeing the improvements.
Yeah, absolutely. I was looking at it from that definitely is true in a veterans court because they're with other vets.
You're right.
But even then, there's levels. Like, there's definitely levels of, well, I'm not a meth addict, I'm just an alcoholic. But we get that in all courts.
Yeah.
And so I think within an adult treatment court or in a family court or within something where you've got other people that are not vets, there is going to be, yes, there's a lot of shame that they feel, like I should be better than this, and it makes them isolated from the other participants that are non-veterans because they don't always mesh. Like, I love it when all of our veterans, the few veterans that go back to school that are in the program, they will come in and they're like, oh my God, these are babies in this class. Like, I don't have anything in common with them. I don't want to listen to them. And I think that's very common with, I have had all of these life experiences. I don't even know how to relate to that person, which does come off to some people as being better than them. And that's why I was trying to, I'm not trying to say that they feel like they're better than others, but it comes off as they're acting like they are. Partly because they don't know how to interact with somebody else that doesn't have the same experiences. It cracks me up because one participant in general, like he comes in and he was taking all of the first, year classes, and so he was with all of these 18 and 19-year-olds, and they don't even have any good thoughts, and I was like, okay, first of all, hold on, let me kind of pull you back, and so we've had a lot of conversations with him, as the judge and as the participant. I've asked him a lot of questions of like, hold on, you're gonna have to interact with people everywhere. Like there's only, the number of veterans is very small compared to the rest of the country. And so you're always gonna have to deal with non-veterans, and you're always gonna have to deal with college students because you're in college. So how can we help you do this? Like, what can you do? Can you have a conversation with this person and put aside the judgment for a minute and just listen to them and say, oh wait, maybe they do have a good point in this class? And he's been pretty resistant, but he's starting to get that idea because he's like, okay, you're right, I can't go through college, this entire college program going, I hate everyone around me, because that's not going to work for his interaction with class projects or with group work or anything like that. And so it is kind of shifting that, and sometimes that is part of shifting their ideas about the other participants of, they may not have the exact experience on the military side as you, but you're both at the same level. I mean, like, you both are in court together. So how can you help each other, or things like that. So I definitely agree with Jesse of finding a mentor for them in the court as another participant. Like, hey, could you show them the ropes? They are going to do very well with getting. Can you walk somebody through once they get forward in their progress? Can you walk somebody through what the testing looks like? They will write an entire thing on, this is how you do this, you need to get up at this time and call this, and they will have the entire schedule, they will be able to go through everything, and they can give it to the next person, because they do really, really well with that training.
And one last thing, you know, I worked with the reserves and Billings, that's where a lot of people know me from. I was part of the INI staff, which was the active duty staff for the Marines. But once you get in there, you know, because in the military, we're taught, you know, don't talk to reserves, they're nobodies. But once you, trust me, it's out there.
We are the redheaded stepchild.
So the way I look at it now, because I have worked with them and I've watched them deploy, and I've been with them when they were deployed, you know, and they were attached to us while we were out there in Iraq. You see that they're Marines, they're soldiers. They went to boot camp. So, you know, once you convince them they are veterans, once they feel comfortable saying that, then it comes out. But it takes a while. You know, it's hard because it's so installed in, you know, the brain housing group, if we want to call it Marine Corps terms. But it's hard for them to convince themselves they are. And it's tough because you get a National Guardsman or woman comes in and says, hey, you know, I'm not a veteran. Oh, you are. You went to Army boot camp. You know, and if they feel that, they start saying, oh, dang, I am a veteran. Doesn't matter if you deployed or not. You got a DD-214, you're a veteran. That's the way I look at it, and it makes them feel better when you tell them that. But it's hard to convince them.
Yeah, it takes some time.
Combat veteran is a set of orders.
Absolutely.
You know, just a piece of paper.
So, could I build off that for
Yeah,
just
go
a
ahead.
second?
Yeah.
So, what's unique about the military culture is the combat vets don't look at them that way. They look at themselves that way. It's a perception. So if you're, like the two individuals you're talking about that don't want to go to camo court because of the perception of having to be around combat veterans, makes them have anxiety and not feel welcomed. That's where you can have a mentor or one of your senior phase members from the camo court come down and sit down with them and say, this is what it's all about. And if that person's a combat veteran, having that combat vet sit down in front of that reservist that hasn't deployed to like Europe or something and say, you're one of us. That is the door that will open, and not only will it open to get him in camo court, it'll open for success in camo court. Because that's what they're not getting. So it's about breaking that culture.
He's not camo court, so he's
No,
a
he's
different one.
in Star, right?
So
yeah, but you've got guys that didn't go to camo court because they felt like they didn't fit the definition of a veteran.
Correct.
So if you wanted to try and promote to get them into camo court and have that option, bring somebody from camo court to do a one-on-one with them and make them feel like they're welcomed into that camaraderie.
You bet.
And then if you don't have a camo court, that is where finding that one participant that may fit their personality and having that one welcome them in. That's the biggest thing, is feeling welcome. And that veterans want structure and camaraderie. That's all we want. And if you can create that in your court, your vets will be successful.
So some of the resources that are in that, in order to get some of the veteran-specific resources, you're going to start with, on the front page, is Jerry Anderson and Jackie Merritt. Those are the two veteran justice outreach specialists that are associated with the VA that will run all of the information to determine whether somebody actually qualifies as a veteran. Because there are people who will try to lie about their service. And that is sometimes where we've definitely run into it, where we've gotten, nope, I'm a veteran, I swear. And we're like, okay, let's see. We gotta see your DD-214. We're gonna introduce you to Jerry Anderson, who is ours. She is Bozeman East. Jackie Merritt is basically Helena West. And so those are the two people to start with, especially if you think that you have a veteran, you know that they've got some resources that they need to tap into. One of their support groups could be the VA group or the veterans group, so that they're getting that connection, but still stay in your court. So we're not, well, I totally advocate veterans courts because there's a reason why those work so well with veterans. That's not everybody's situation, and we don't want to stop somebody from going to the treatment court just because they didn't want to go into a vet's court. But they have other things that they could use, and those are the two people to start with. They will run VRSS. There's a Justice for Vets packet at the very back that talks about the VRSS system, which is how they check for status of the veteran benefits and things like that. That is your front line to start with on connecting them to services. If you're going to send a person who's been in the military through MRT, which is the Moral Recognition Therapy, there is a specific veterans one that maybe that is what they need. And Jerry runs one in Billings. We have one here. We can connect you with some groups where they could potentially be put into one through teleservices and things like that. So that way they're getting some connection to the veteran community without utilizing the vets court itself or the cable court itself. So those are some definitely benefits that are out there.
I have a dumb question, but can veterans courts ever take individuals who had other than honorable discharge?
So yes, in our court, we take that on a case-by-case basis. There's a lot of times where the reason that they're now in court with us is because of their service, that they started drinking or they started doing drugs because they were dealing with trauma and things like that. They got dishonorably discharged or other than honorable discharges. That kicked them out because they've been doing drugs, like in the National Guard especially. If you get popped with a drug test, you could have gotten an OTH, which is other than honorable. But it was, there's a lot of correlation between your time in the military, the stuff that you've been through, the trauma that you've been through that created that drug problem, that now means that you got the OTH and now you're back into the civilian court with the drug charge, and so why would we turn that back?
Yeah.
We've created this problem as a country, like we deployed all of these young kids, I mean, like 18 to 20-year-olds being soldiers because they're easy to train and their brain is not developed, and we can input what we want into their brain so that they do what they need to do to keep their buddies safe, themselves safe, all of that. So why would we turn them away?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a lawyer, and when I was in law school, I did an internship with Navy JAG, and that's where I was put helping with the administrative discharges for other than honorable, and it was
Like
all 18, 19, 20-year-old kids who were getting caught for spice and marijuana, and then administratively out for, we typically did other than honorable discharge, and we had those hearings multiple times a month, and it was so many young kids that when I think about now, I assume they went out and probably struggled for a little bit.
Because the military didn't want to deal with the problems they had caused.
Exactly. I mean, we as a country want what we want, but we don't always want to fix the problem. And the military is a prime example of that. Like, we want those 18 to 21-year-olds to be in the war, to go do everything. But we don't teach them any life skills, and that's the other thing that you will see, especially with the younger group of veterans that have maybe gone regular military, they've served their term, they got out, but they don't know how to balance a checkbook. They don't know how to cook for themselves. They got 3 square meals and they got paid and they got their housing paid for. Like, they don't know how to budget. They bought fast cars when they got back, and now they're in a ton of debt. So those are definitely things that the veterans courts, and for veterans in general, they may not always have those skills. It depends. I mean, but a lot of the younger ones definitely don't have those skills.
Yeah.
And my court has been, we have taken a couple of active duty participants, and one young kid actually ended up being deployed to Romania while he was in our court. And so he took an upcharge to a felony instead of a misdemeanor, because the misdemeanor, the felony can be deferred and removed off his record. So as long as that was in that pending status, he couldn't be relieved of his military status. And so we've done that on 2 occasions and worked with them during their deployments. The judge made an exception under the federal firearms provision that they could have their firearms during active duty. And so it worked quite well doing it that way.
And I will say district courts have a little bit better jurisdiction when it comes to some of that. I don't, as a lower, because I'm a lower court judge, so I don't have quite the same jurisdiction. Some of it I do, some of it I don't. There's some question, but we've also worked with, a lot of National Guard soldiers that have to go on AT, and how we address that and things like that to get them tested and to do what they need to do. I know Judge Nisley in the Camo Court has been a huge pioneer of teleservices. That is something that I'm still trying to get involved in, because I get a little nervous about that. I definitely had that experience in COVID where, I got all my vets online, and we're doing it so that we're continuing court while COVID was happening. I got the hand to the face and I was like, whoo, we're done with this. You are all coming back to court now. Just because that's such a harder thing to do, and as a newer court, switching over to teleservices has been a little harder, but we're starting to do that more and more just because it helps, so that we can address issues and things like that.
Mary, how does that work with while they're deployed and they remaining in treatment court? Is that just through teleservice?
Teleservice, yeah, and then,
Does the military work with the court?
yeah,
In regards to,
their commanding officers worked with us, and so, we got reports back, and he would check in, and so it was.
Even in Persian Gulf, I saw tents that were set up with a little sign outside that says, Friends of Bill W., meet here Wednesday night, 1900.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the military understands that there is a problem, and there are active 12-step programs on military installations.
Yeah. My concern, because I was a JAG officer too, this is the other issue that I have, is I know the difference between Title 32, Title 10, I know the military side, and we have no jurisdiction. I mean, we can make it work, but if something truly went sideways with a participant, we didn't have the jurisdiction to really come back and grab them. The Army or the military in general, the big military will always have jurisdiction over them when they're deployed and Title 10. And so that was some of the things that, because I have the experience that I have, I am less likely to do something like that. But when you've got a participant that really wants to do it, you can make it work. I just looked at the jurisdictional issue and I was like, yeah, I'm not going to fight the big Army on this, because I'll lose. I'll absolutely lose them. And if they are doing something wrong, yeah, I can definitely talk to their CO. We've got a lot of help with their CO, but if it comes down to it and the military says, nope, they're done.
And I think the judge had to make that realization that the military did have overall jurisdiction of him, and that if he did something with them, then he would be gone. This was very important to him because he was getting a promotion to an officer, and so
yeah. He was very motivated to stay at the court.
Yeah, super motivated, and so that's a difference. In my career, I've done, in the military, if they get a DUI, I've had to do some, I don't want to call it a pardon, but so that they get those removed from their records, so executive clemencies, so that they get them removed from their records so that they could be deployed to other countries. And so doing that through the governor's office so that they can get their misdemeanor records removed.
Yeah, there's a lot of jurisdictional issues when you're looking at actually serving a participant or a client that's going to be still under the jurisdiction of the Army or the military in general. I always say the Army because that's where I come from and that's where I know all the rules. But it's definitely doable, and there's times where that participant will be so much more motivated to be a participant, to be in your court, to do everything that they need to do, to make those changes, because the consequences of not doing it are so much greater on their career side of things when they're in the Army, or when they're in their regular military. So I definitely, if you can make it work, and you feel like that participant really wants to be there, that's where the voluntariness, you can tell if they truly want to be there, if they're just complying, then you may want to be willing to work with them if they were trying to do AET or their commitment with the National Guard or the Reserves, or if they were deploying. So, any questions? This is about you guys so that you get kind of more information.
In terms of treatment, has the state vet courts kept up with trauma treatment in terms of employing people that have backgrounds in clinical traumatology and such?
So we utilize a lot of the VA services, and I would say, yes, the VA is keeping up with that, and that's a really big area. The military in general, you know, sex assaults and sexual harassment and all of that the trauma that can get created within service, that has been a very big topic of conversation for longer than I was in the military. And so there was always training on the military side of what to do, what to see. Suicide prevention, that's always, you know, those big things are part of now the VA and the military. So you're getting that, and with being able to use the VA services, we're seeing a lot more of that.
And just to answer your question a little further, there's a movement right now in district court to make the clients have a violence assessment. And there are very few clinical providers that can assess that violence assessment. And Jerry, through the VA, is one of the particular providers. And so I have been trying to convince her to do some outside of the VA work on some of the guys because I'm having such difficulty. I think there's one provider here in Bozeman that will do it, but I haven't found anybody else in Billings that's willing to do that violence assessment. So,
but Jerry can't.
Yes.
She gets paid by the VA, so she
Yeah.
and her training came through the VA. So she's very careful about only utilizing that with veterans.
I found that interesting today with Carolyn Hart. She commented that actually PPE should be implementing more than just one risk and needs assessment. Violence assessment should be one, but we should be implementing.
So,
I have like a general question, and this is, again, I'm an outside perspective, and I'm younger, and so there's a lot of things that I hear and don't necessarily follow up the research wise, but I hear a lot of things about veterans not being able to get the services they need, not because they're not available, but because it's overwhelmed, or there, you know, long wait times, or different things like that.
So Montana's a little bit better because we have, I mean, like, especially when you have it with the treatment courts, like, we have that connection with the VA. So we immediately can get people where they need to go. Now, they may not be able to get into the program, like Sheridan would be a residential treatment. They may not be able to get into those right away, but we've got the surrounding services that we can put together to serve them in a little bit easier format because we have Jerry, because we have Jackie, because we have that connection with the VA. And so I think Montana does a better job. We're smaller. We have less people that are getting served in the state. That I think you can get them in a little bit better. Now, if we were in Phoenix, who knows what that would look like, because that would be a wait list and that would be all of those things. But we have like Jesse, who he's a community treatment provider, like he's our community treatment provider, but he's got the military background and he's got that experience and he's got the training that could help that individual if we couldn't get them into the VA right away.
Yeah, I just want to mention this Veterans Navigation Network. This was started by this Mike McManus, and that's what they do with guys that are getting out. They can help them, you know, get the benefits, all that stuff, and they try to make that connection before they end up in the camel court.
Yes, exactly.
So this is a good source.
Yeah.
It's in Billings.
So if you all want more information or you want to email me, I'm going to give you my email address. Because if you have questions or something comes up and you want to ask, I can try to connect you with who needs to go, and I would love that information because I will, perfect, I will pass it on to everyone. But my email is jherrington@bozeman.net. And so if something comes up and you guys have questions, or you're thinking about something and you're like, hey, I need this resource or I want to do this, let me know, and I will happily connect you. I know Judge Nisley is the exact same way. You can email her and she will move heaven and earth to get you what you need, because that's just who she is. And so her resources too, like she has so many more even across the country because of being the mentor court and things like that. She is an awesome resource. But please feel free to email me.
Can you give that address again, please?
Yes, INGTON at bozeman.net. So NET.
Quick question for all of you who have treatment courts then. If you end up having to revoke them because they need a higher level of care, do you send them then to, will you take it back to court and then request them to go to the Sheraton and not like CCP or Elkhorn or Nexus? Or
Well, that's a multiple pronged question, because we probably wouldn't revoke out of our treatment court for a higher level of care. So we would look at working with the VA to send them. We send a lot of people to Hot Springs in South Dakota. And so for there, but we also, my treatment court partners with Rimrock. And so the VA will pay for that as an outside services to go just directly to Rimrock if we need a 3.5 level of care.
We're the same way.
And we wouldn't revoke on that. Now, if they needed a higher level of care before they got into court that we couldn't serve, then that would be something that we may not accept them into the court because we don't have the resources to serve the needs that they have. But once they're in court, we're not going to revoke somebody because they don't have, we would put together the care that they need for court
And
as best as possible.
Sorry, Camel Court, we are a 2-track court. One is for substance abuse, you can come in on that track, or you can come in on a mental health track without a substance abuse. And so, we don't broadly say that, but it is a second track that you can, if they have a military connection. No, we've always done the 2-track.
Yeah.
Because they keep it really quiet.
Yes, yeah, and so, services are harder, and the population is, so, but we do take people specifically in that track, and we've had some, and it works. And so, one of the things I found, well, and I shared this with Judge Herrington, is during my research for this, that the #1 downloaded and forged document is a DD-214. And so, when you're validating your, that's, we do it with Jerry and have the VA validate if they're actually truly. And so, and it's not necessarily a lot of times we've run into in our court, it's their MOS and their metals or whatever that they kind of alter a little. Yeah, and so those are the things that, I really found was interesting that, I would have thought like a timesheet or a doctor's note would have been the most.
So I was just chiming in on, on the, she says she has 2-track, So how I went around that is if they have a substance abuse disorder, they have a mental health disorder too, because it does tie together. So when I brief that in our team meetings, they already know that. So that's how I bring them in, but we require both. So I do get a mental health assessment and a CD type thing, but it's just the way we went around that. Having 2 tracks is awesome, I think it's cool. But one other thing I know she mentioned about about how their discharges are and stuff. We aren't funded by the VA, so we don't have to worry about no GPDs or anything like that. So that's why we do accept, people with those kind of discharges, because it is a DD-214. Doesn't matter why they got kicked out. It matters that there was something within their service that got them kicked out, and it probably ties into where they're at right now. But we don't judge them. That's not our job. Our job is to get them treatment or get them treatment. So.
The other good thing too is, and this is a little known fact, unless you're in that circle, but discharges can be upgraded. And so going through a treatment court, they could graduate from a treatment court, and that can actually be used to upgrade their discharge to an honorable or a general. Because usually they wouldn't go to the honorable, but they would go to the general, which would then give them back some of those benefits. There's a clinic at University of Montana that they actually help a lot with those upgrades. And so treatment courts, especially any treatment court, but veterans treatment courts too, when they can prove that they've been through the treatment, they've dealt with the problem, that can actually be used to help them in the future as well. And so I can connect you with Hillary Wandler is the professor that actually runs that veterans clinic. And there's actually a veterans bar that specifically helps with veteran issues with the state bar of Montana as well, and I can get you connected to that one as well. So those are just some good things to know too, that as your participants are going through, you may be able to help them if they were OTH, and so they don't qualify for VA services. That's why we have a community treatment provider. I mean, we don't utilize the VA for all the participants because we can't, but we will make it work and we will make sure that they still get it, because then they can always try to upgrade their discharge. So, a couple of things in that packet. So this is a nice little picture. It got shrunk, so sorry about that, but the website is right down there. This is kind of a neat interception into the criminal justice system and the ways that you can, as we're thinking about how they get into the system and how we get them out, it goes through all of the different places that they could potentially go into the justice system and like some of the things that we could do to help get them out before they get to crimes. Because you may run into them as a defense counsel and you've got a client who, yes, they have a charge, but there's some other resources that you can get to before they go to sentencing or something like that. This is the VA information, so it kind of talks about the VA system in Montana. And it shows, and these websites are all on that very first page as well, but I wanted to kind of highlight them so you knew what you were looking at. But that kind of shows all of the different centers that are around Montana, and the main line, Fort Harrison is of course the main VA hospital and VA system for Montana, and then a lot of different towns and cities have components of the VA as well. And then it just talks about their budget and all of the numbers, because we all love numbers as a treatment court. And then in that, the very last group is the Justice for Vets. If you have a veteran and you want some specific information, Justice for Vets is an awesome place to go for a lot of resources. They have a bunch of articles and a bunch of different things that you can get on there and find about how to address a veteran specifically in your treatment court that's not a vet's treatment court. So that's always a good place to go as well.
And they got e-learning too.
Yes, they do. And so for kind of veteran-specific issues that you may run into, they've got some amazing classes online. The other slides are, like I said, I borrowed it from the last one that we saw over in RISE from these two individuals who are counselors with the VA, and they do a lot of research, and so some of that in there is some, for your judges, bibliotherapy. When you are working with a vet that doesn't have other vets around them, you can do some book reports, so make them read a chapter, write a paragraph or a page about it. It helps them connect sometimes with their service in a way that makes them start feeling better about where they're at and what they've done. And so there's a lot of a lot of good books that are out there that you could recommend as part of the sentence or the sanction, or even homework, because you don't always have to give a paper as a sanction. I did a lot for homework so that they're learning something and we can talk about it. But those are some good books that you can recommend to your participants. There's some other online help as well, some self-help resources that you can always give to those individuals so that they have it to kind of help bring them back into the veteran community. Because again, we want to build their community, so after the fact they feel really good about their service and they're connecting with people that they may have lost. Because that's a lot of the issue with that identity shift, is when they've lost that connection with the veteran community, how do they get it back? And then just some other things, like as you go through and read, kind of, there's some research on the veteran identity, kind of showing some themes that you could be looking for while they're talking to you and things like that to help you get a little bit more identification with them. So they did an awesome presentation. So if you see either Dr. Meyer or Dr. Becerra, great presenters, really great class. And hopefully maybe next year we'll get to see them here. So,
That'd be awesome.
any other questions?
I was just going to ask,
Yeah.
Are we the only court that has mentors?
No.
No, we have
We have-
mentors too.
Do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
All the veterans courts have mentors. Because even Great Falls, and I know Butte does too, because I've been talking to, I did a lot of kind of help with talking to the 89th and Butte for Butte's veterans court to get mentors on it. You guys have the best established, I think one of the better established mentor groups. We're struggling with ours. I mean, we've done really well, and then we haven't. Like it's a harder thing to get kind of dialed in. You guys have it dialed in more than a lot of other places do. So. But yeah, if you guys need mentors too, like connect with Camo and say, hey, we just need somebody to, you know, do you have a mentor that we could borrow to utilize for this participant? He doesn't want to be in the Camo court, but he wants to be in ours. But that connection to connect them back into the veteran community is so important. So, all right.